The war seemed unwinnable, and yet humanity refused to surrender. Earth, once a proud cradle of human civilization, was now the last bastion against the relentless Zorath Empire. The alien invaders had swept across countless worlds, their warships darkening the skies of every planet they conquered. Cities fell, populations were slaughtered, and yet humanity clung to a flickering hope. A hope fueled by whispers of a weapon, an impossible weapon that could turn the tide. At the heart of the United Earth Coalition's military command, an unlikely plan began to form. The Zorath Empire had technology light years ahead of humanity's greatest achievements. Their ships could warp through space with ease, their weapons obliterated entire fleets with a single shot. It was clear to everyone that humanity stood no chance in direct combat. But in the silence of war, amidst the ruins and the ashes, a small group of engineers and scientists came together. In the dark corners of underground labs, away from the prying eyes of the Zorath, they started to dream. They didn't dream of surrender or retreat. They dreamed of something far more audacious. The project was called Excalibur. It wasn't just a ship. It was a symbol of everything humanity stood for: ingenuity, resilience, and the unbreakable will to survive. We'll reverse engineer their technology. Dr. Evelyn Grant, one of the leading scientists behind the project, explained to a small, secretive group of military officers and engineers. Her voice was steady, but her eyes burned with a fierce determination. We'll take their greatest weapons, dissect them, and turn them into our own. It won't be easy, but it will be worth it. The officers exchanged glances, some skeptical, others hopeful. It wasn't just the technology they lacked. It was the resources, the time, and the manpower. Earth's economy had collapsed. The Zorath's blockade had choked off most of the galaxy's supply lines, and what little was left had been consumed in the endless defense of humanity's colonies. Still, there were those who believed. They believed in human potential, in the idea that despite overwhelming odds, the human race had an unyielding spirit. And so the project began, under the radar, out of sight, but no less urgent. The goal was clear: to build a ship that could challenge the Zorath on their own terms, a ship capable of striking fear into the hearts of the invaders. The crew was small but talented. Engineers who had once worked on civilian projects were now thrust into the defense of humanity. The best minds in military strategy and engineering came together in secret, forging alliances with anyone who could provide the needed expertise. They knew the stakes. Excalibur was humanity's last hope. In the quiet moments when the stress and danger became overwhelming, a single phrase repeated through their minds: "It shouldn't exist, but we will make it anyway." The Excalibur would become humanity's symbol, an answer to the impossible. But as the work began, no one truly understood just how difficult and dangerous this dream would be. In the hidden recesses of Earth's last strongholds, a quiet revolution was underway. The Excalibur was no longer just an idea. It was taking shape. But it wasn't without its challenges. The engineers worked day and night, often in isolation, driven by the knowledge that humanity's future rested on their success. Every inch of the warship's design was meticulously planned. Every system adapted to the unique needs of the mission. The most advanced materials were scarce, and every resource was stretched thin, but the team refused to let that stop them. "We're working against time," Captain Marcus Cole, the lead military officer assigned to oversee the project, said one evening, standing over a holographic display of the ship's schematics. His eyes, red from sleepless nights, scanned the data. "Every delay is another Zorath ship headed straight for Earth. If we fail, it's not just the war we lose, it's everything." Dr. Evelyn Grant stood beside him, staring at the same schematics. She was the architect of the warship's technology, having designed a hybrid system that combined human ingenuity with alien technology they'd scavenged from Zorath Rex. It was dangerous, experimental, and entirely untested. Yet it was humanity's best hope. "We're making progress," she said, her voice steady but tinged with worry. "The reactors are coming online, but the energy core still isn't stable. We've never seen anything like it. This kind of power, it could destroy the ship before it even leaves the dock. But if we can stabilize it," Captain Cole nodded, "it'll give us a fighting chance." The truth, however, was that no one truly knew if the Excalibur would work as planned. The ship was not only a technological marvel, but a terrifying gamble. They had no blueprint for success, no test runs to guide them. Every part of the ship, from its hyperdrive system to its devastating weaponry, was new. They were inventing technology that had never existed, and no one knew if it would hold together when the real battle began. To make matters worse, the Zorath were growing more aware of humanity's activities. Their spies had infiltrated human colonies, sabotaging supply lines, and leaking information about the project. The risks of discovery were high, but there was no turning back now. If the Zorath learned of the Excalibur, they would stop at nothing to destroy it before it could ever take flight. Despite the constant threat, the team pressed forward. Hidden laboratories beneath the surface of Earth's war-torn cities became beacons of relentless innovation. The power of human perseverance shone through in ways that defied the Zorath's most advanced expectations. No matter how many setbacks they encountered, the team would adapt, revise, and push forward. Their failure was not an option. One evening, as the core chamber finally hummed to life, Dr. Grant stood back, her heart racing. The energy source, a fusion of Zorath and human technology, was now stable, pulsating with a power that could light a city for years. She couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope. "We've done it," she whispered. But even as the words left her lips, she knew the hardest part was still to come. They had built a warship that shouldn't exist, but now they had to make sure it could survive the war it was built for. As the days wore on, humanity's final hope, the Excalibur, began to take shape. The project was reaching its critical phase, and Dr. Evelyn Grant had never felt the weight of her work more heavily. The ship's hull had been reinforced with a hybrid material, combining human alloys and Zorath technology that had been painstakingly reverse-engineered. The weapons systems were ready for their first tests, but it was the core, the heart of the ship, that remained a volatile enigma. The unstable energy source was humanity's greatest breakthrough, and their biggest risk. A few weeks earlier, a small team of scientists had discovered a method of harnessing a mysterious energy field inside the remnants of a destroyed Zorath warship. The energy field, unlike anything humanity had ever encountered, held untold power. But as with all great discoveries, there were dangers. The energy source was both unpredictable and highly unstable. It could provide the Excalibur with unimaginable strength, but if it failed, it could obliterate the warship in an instant, taking everything and everyone down with it. Every test had pushed the boundaries of what humanity knew about energy and propulsion, but none had come without terrifying consequences. The first attempts to tap into the power had caused the ship's reactors to overheat, nearly ripping the hull apart. The second time, a test explosion leveled part of the underground facility where the core was being constructed. Yet each time, the team had learned something crucial, improved their designs, and grown more determined to succeed. The breakthrough came one night when Dr. Grant and her team were working on the core under the dim glow of emergency lights. The reactor, after several failed attempts, suddenly hummed with energy. The readings were off the charts, dangerously high, but there was no catastrophic failure. Instead, a soft pulse of energy radiated outward, lighting up the control room like the dawn. "We've stabilized it," Dr. Grant said, breathless. She was astonished, staring at the control panels as they glowed steady. "I don't believe it," one of the engineers muttered, shaking his head in disbelief. "But it's holding. For now." For a moment, there was silence. A collective breath held, the kind that only happens when the impossible becomes reality. Then, as the hum of the reactor echoed throughout the room, a series of quiet cheers erupted. It was a small victory, but it felt like a monumental one. Excalibur had just taken its first real step into the realm of the possible. But Dr. Grant knew better than to let optimism cloud her judgment. The reactor's power was immense, yes, but no one had any idea how long it would last, or what consequences it might have once the ship was fully operational. If they couldn't control the energy, Excalibur could become a weapon of mass destruction, not for the Zoreth, but for humanity itself. "We've done it," she said, voice steadier now, but still carrying the weight of the moment. "But we can't afford to make a mistake. Not now. Not with everything riding on this." As the team moved to finalize the core's systems, a cold, creeping fear settled in Dr. Grant's stomach. They had created the perfect weapon. But now, they were playing with fire. The stakes had just gone up. The Excalibur was no longer just a ship. It was a ticking time bomb. The Excalibur stood ready, its massive frame now a testament to humanity's ingenuity and desperation. The warship gleamed in the dim light of the secret launch bay, its weapon systems powered up, its reactor humming with a barely contained energy that seemed to vibrate through the very air. The crew had worked tirelessly to perfect every detail, every bolt and circuit. Yet, despite all the progress, there was still an undercurrent of doubt. Could it truly survive in the face of the Zoreth? The situation was growing ever more dire. The Zoreth fleet was closing in on Earth's final defenses, and their flagship, an indomitable force, was just days away from arriving. Humanity's colonies were scattered, broken, and on the brink of collapse. Every delay meant another world lost. Every second wasted could mean the difference between survival and extinction. Inside the war room, military leaders, scientists, and engineers gathered, the weight of their responsibility pressing down on them. Captain Marcus Cole stood in front of a holographic display of the galaxy, where red dots marked the approaching Zoreth ships. "We've waited as long as we can," Cole said, his voice firm but tinged with the stress of the situation. "The Excalibur is our last chance. If we don't launch now, Earth is lost." Dr. Grant stepped forward, her eyes drawn to the glowing map, her thoughts heavy. "We're not ready," she said quietly, though the words felt more like a confession than a statement of fact. "There are still system checks we haven't completed. The energy core is volatile. If we don't control it properly, the Excalibur might detonate before we even reach the battlefront." Her words hung in the air, but there was no time for hesitation. The Zoreth were relentless. They would not wait for humanity to be ready. Every delay gave them more time to strengthen their assault. "We have no choice," Captain Cole replied. "If the Excalibur fails, we fight anyway. If it succeeds, we fight with the power to defeat them." His eyes met Dr. Grant's. "We're out of time. We fight now, or we die." The room fell silent. Every person present understood the gravity of the moment. It wasn't just a warship they were sending into battle. It was their collective will to survive. The Excalibur symbolized the last flicker of hope for the human race, the final line of defense against the overwhelming might of the Zoreth Empire. A low rumble reverberated through the walls as the Excalibur's engines powered up, their energy beginning to course through the ship like lifeblood. In the control room, the crew of the warship worked in unison, calibrating systems and preparing for launch. "We're clear for takeoff," one of the engineers called out. "It's time." Dr. Grant stepped back, watching as the Excalibur slowly lifted off the ground, its enormous form gliding into the skies. A wave of relief washed over her, but it was quickly replaced by the gnawing fear that had been with her since the project began. There was no turning back now. The Excalibur was committed to its path, and so was humanity. As the warship ascended into space, the enormity of their mission hit everyone on board. This wasn't just a battle for Earth. It was a battle for everything humanity had ever stood for. The fate of their future, of their species, lay in the hands of a ship that should never have existed. The stars stretched out before them, vast and endless, but all Marcus Cole could focus on was the looming darkness of the Zoreth fleet. The Excalibur's engines hummed beneath him, a deep, vibrating pulse that matched the thrum of his own heartbeat. The warship was on its maiden voyage, and the crew was nervous, every system under constant scrutiny as they prepared to face the ultimate test. The briefing had been clear. Engage the Zoreth. Destroy their fleet before Earth is wiped from the map. This is it, Cole said, his voice calm, but carrying a weight of finality. He was at the helm, looking at the holographic map of the Zoreth forces closing in on Earth's orbit. We've trained for this moment. Let's show them what humanity is made of. Dr. Evelyn Grant stood at his side, hands clasped tightly. The reactor's power was now stable, but no one knew how it would behave in combat. They had no second chances. One wrong move and the Excalibur, the last hope of humanity, could become a weapon of mass destruction, wiping out not just the Zoreth, but Earth as well. On the bridge, the crew worked feverishly, their minds sharp despite the exhaustion of the last few days. Every sensor, every weapon system was activated and tested in real time as the Excalibur flew deeper into enemy space. The Zoreth fleet, an enormous collection of sleek, deadly ships, hovered like a predator waiting for its prey. At the head of it all was the flagship, a massive, angular vessel whose mere size seemed to mock humanity's fragile resistance. The first shots came without warning. "Enemy ships are targeting us," a crew member shouted. "Shields at 60%. Cole's hands gripped the controls. "Shields up. Prepare for evasive maneuvers." The Excalibur surged forward, its engines roaring to life as it veered sharply to the left. The Zoreth weaponry was devastating, and it only took moments for the battle to escalate. A beam of green light streaked across the darkness, striking the Excalibur's shields with a massive thud. The ship rocked violently, but the shields held, just barely. "Return fire," Cole barked, his voice tight with tension. "Target their smaller ships. We need to create a breach in their formation." The weapons systems roared to life. Blasts of brilliant blue energy shot from the Excalibur's cannons, slamming into the enemy ships. The first Zoreth ship exploded in a cascade of fire, its remains drifting like debris in space. But the Zoreth didn't falter. They retaliated with a vengeance, launching a series of missiles that impacted the Excalibur's shields. "Shields at 40%, came the grim report. "Hull integrity holding." Dr. Grant's eyes widened. "We can't take too many more hits like that. We need to act fast." Cole's mind raced. Excalibur was still an unknown, its power untested under such extreme pressure. But the crew had no choice. They had to push forward, or humanity's war was as good as lost. "Prepare for the experimental weapon," Cole ordered, turning to Dr. Grant. "We need to end this now." Dr. Grant nodded sharply. The experimental weapon, a new form of energy burst designed to destabilize Zoreth shield systems, was humanity's last hope to break through the enemy defenses. It was risky, just as untested as the reactor, but it was their only shot at gaining the upper hand. The weapon activated with a low hum, energy crackling around the Excalibur. The crew braced themselves, firing in 3, 2, 1. A blinding pulse of light erupted from the ship's core, slamming into the heart of the Zoreth flagship. For a moment, everything went silent, as if space itself held its breath. Then, the Zoreth flagship exploded in a fiery blast, its enormous frame breaking apart in an instant. The Zoreth forces, stunned by the destruction of their flagship, began to retreat. But the victory was bittersweet. The Excalibur had survived. Barely. Their first encounter had proven that humanity's ship could fight back, but the price had been steep. The battle was won, but the war was far from over. The Excalibur drifted through space, scared but victorious. The Zoreth flagship's debris still floated like a ghostly reminder of their first encounter, its pieces scattered across the void. It had been a critical win, but the battle had taken its toll. The Excalibur's systems were strained, and the crew was pushed to their limits. They had faced the might of the Zoreth, and while the enemy had retreated for now, Their retreat wasn't out of fear. It was a calculated pause, a regrouping. The war was far from over. Dr. Evelyn Grant paced the command center, her mind racing. The weapon, the experimental energy burst, had worked, but only just. It had overloaded the Zoreth shields and torn their flagship apart, but it had also taxed the Excalibur's reactor beyond what anyone had anticipated. The core was unstable again, its power fluctuating dangerously. The slightest miscalculation could cause an explosion that would wipe out the ship and everyone aboard. "Captain, we can't push the reactor much further," Dr. Grant said, her voice tight with urgency. She turned to Marcus Cole, who stood by the holo display, looking over the battle data. The burst was a success, but the core is on the brink of failure. If we try that again, the Excalibur might not survive the next hit. Cole didn't look up from the display. His jaw was clenched, and his eyes betrayed his exhaustion. But he understood the stakes. He always did. "We don't have the luxury of time, Evelyn," he said, his voice firm despite the weight of his words. "The Zoreth will be back, and they'll be angrier. We need to keep pushing forward. We can't afford to give them a chance to recover. If we wait to repair the ship, we might not make it back to Earth at all." Dr. Grant's frustration bubbled to the surface. "I'm not suggesting we do nothing, but we can't keep sacrificing the ship's integrity. This vessel is humanity's last hope. If we break it now, we're finished." "We don't have time to debate this," Cole shot back, his voice harder now. "Make whatever adjustments you need, but the Excalibur will keep fighting." Silence fell over the room. Dr. Grant's eyes locked with Cole's, but there was no warmth in the exchange, only the cold reality of their situation. They were both right. Every choice was a gamble now. Humanity's future rested on a knife edge, and each decision, each action, could tip them into disaster. "Understood," Dr. Grant finally said, her voice strained but resolute. "I'll reroute some of the auxiliary power to stabilize the reactor. It won't be a permanent fix, but it'll give us enough to reach the next phase of the mission." Cole nodded. "Do it. We'll need all the firepower we can get." The crew moved quickly, hands flying over controls as the ship hummed with activity. The Excalibur was far from perfect, and its weaknesses were becoming more apparent by the minute, but it was still humanity's best, and only, weapon, and they weren't going to let it fall. As the ship limped through space, Captain Cole stood on the bridge, staring out into the darkness. His mind was a maelstrom of worry and calculation. The Zoreth were still out there, still planning, and their next attack could come at any moment. They had broken through once, but the question remained, could they survive the next blow? The Excalibur might have been a miracle, but even miracles had their limits. The Excalibur's journey through space had turned into a desperate race against time. The crew's resolve was being tested in ways they could never have prepared for. Dr. Evelyn Grant had managed to stabilize the reactor temporarily, but the repairs were only a stopgap. Every moment they spent in space increased the risk of a catastrophic failure. Despite the ever-growing strain on the ship, the crew was determined to press on. The Zoreth would not wait. "We've reached the Zoreth fleet's outer perimeter," came the call from Lieutenant O'Connor, the communications officer. "They're massing in a formation. Looks like they're preparing for another assault." Captain Cole stood at the command center, his fingers pressed to the console, his eyes narrowed as he analyzed the incoming data. The fleet had not dispersed as they had hoped. Instead, they were consolidating, gathering in strength. Earth's defenses were dwindling, and the Zoreth were closing in for the kill. The next battle would be far more intense, and with the Excalibur still not fully operational, it was unclear if they could survive it. "We're not going to make it if we keep dodging their attacks," Cole muttered under his breath. He turned to Dr. Grant, who was still working furiously at a console, trying to rebalance the energy output from the reactor. "Evelyn, how long until the next phase of the reactor's destabilization?" Dr. Grant paused, her face pale. but her voice steady. "About 45 minutes, but it's hard to predict. The core's fluctuations are becoming more erratic. We won't have time for another burst like we did earlier." A tense silence filled the room as the reality of their situation settled in. They had pushed the Excalibur to its limit, and now they were on borrowed time. Every choice was a gamble, but they had no other options. The Zorath were too close. They had to fight, and they had to fight now. "We'll take the fight to them," Cole declared, his voice unyielding. "Divert all power to the forward cannons. If we're going down, we're going down swinging." Dr. Grant's eyes flashed with determination. "Understood. I'll stabilize the reactor as much as possible. We'll have power to the weapons, but it won't last long." The crew moved quickly, their movements sharp and efficient as they prepared for battle. The Excalibur's cannons charge, the ship's engines flaring to life as it accelerated toward the heart of the Zorath fleet. They were going in hot, and there was no turning back. As they closed the distance, the first wave of enemy ships launched their attack. A barrage of energy blasts and missiles tore through the blackness of space, lighting up the cold void in bursts of green and red. The Excalibur shook under the assault, its shields flickering dangerously. "Shields at 30%. Lieutenant O'Connor shouted. "Return fire," Cole commanded, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Target their lead ships. We need to create a breach." The Excalibur fired with everything it had. The forward cannons unleashed a devastating barrage, each shot slamming into the Zorath ships. The energy pulses tore through enemy hulls, creating explosions that sent debris scattering in all directions. For a moment, it felt as though they might actually have a chance. But then, a new threat appeared. A massive Zorath warship, far larger than any of the others, emerged from the shadows, its weapons locked and ready. "We've got a new target," O'Connor shouted. "It's their flagship, much bigger than the last one." Captain Cole's heart skipped a beat. It was the Zorath's last play. The ship was their command center, their heart, and it was coming straight for them. "We can't outrun it," Cole said grimly. "Prepare for impact. All hands, brace yourselves." The Excalibur rocketed forward, but the Zorath flagship was relentless. The final battle was about to begin, and the crew of the Excalibur knew that nothing would be the same after this. The moment the Zorath flagship entered the fray, all hope seemed to narrow into a single crushing point. The monstrous warship was more than just an enemy vessel. It was a symbol of the Zorath Empire's indomitable will. Its hull was coated with blackened metal, and its weapons bristled with an array of devastating energy cannons. As it advanced toward the Excalibur, a chilling realization hit the crew. This wasn't just a fight for Earth anymore. It was a fight for everything humanity had ever built, everything they had ever believed in. "We need to destroy that ship," Captain Marcus Cole growled, his voice taut with urgency. He could feel the weight of the moment bearing down on him, but he couldn't afford hesitation now. It's the heart of their fleet. If we take it down, the rest of the Zorath forces will fall apart. Dr. Evelyn Grant was already at the reactor, her hands flying over the control panels, trying to push the core to its limits without overloading it completely. The ship shuddered again as another volley of Zorath energy blasts rocked the Excalibur. The lights flickered. The shields were failing, and the hull was groaning under the strain. "Shields at 10%, O'Connor shouted, panic creeping into his voice. "Hull integrity is beginning to fail. We can't let up now." Cole barked. "Keep firing. Focus everything on that flagship." The Excalibur fired again, the energy beams from its cannons blasting into the advancing Zorath warship. The attacks were powerful, but the Zorath flagship's shields were far more advanced than anything the crew had encountered so far. The ship's return fire was devastating. A direct hit slammed into the Excalibur's port side, causing sparks to fly and systems to short-circuit. Crew members were thrown to the floor as the ship bucked under the impact. "We're losing power," shouted Lieutenant O'Connor, fighting to keep his footing as the bridge shuddered violently. Dr. Grant's voice was strained but determined. "Captain, we can't take much more. I need more time to stabilize the core. If I push it any further, we could tear ourselves apart." Cole's mind raced. They were running out of options. The Zoreth flagship had them in a vice grip, and their weapons were barely making a dent. But then, amidst the chaos, a sudden realization struck him. The core. They could use the instability of the reactor as a weapon. "Dr. Grant," Cole said, his voice urgent, "can you reroute all the power into the energy burst again, one final time? Everything we've got. Can you do it?" There was a pause before Dr. Grant responded. "I can, but it's a gamble, Captain. If it works, we could destroy the flagship. If it fails, we don't have a choice," Cole interrupted. "Do it. Now." As Dr. Grant gave the order to her team, the crew prepared for the final gamble. The Excalibur shuddered as the reactor hummed with power, more power than it had ever harnessed before. A great beam of energy began to charge, building with a pulse of raw, unstable force. Firing in 3, 2, 1. The entire ship shook as the blast was unleashed. A massive surge of energy shot out from the Excalibur's core, hitting the Zoreth flagship with the force of a supernova. The flagship's shields faltered, then crumpled beneath the overwhelming blast. For a split second, it seemed as though the very fabric of space had torn open. Then, the Zoreth flagship exploded in a brilliant explosion of light and energy. The shockwave rippled through the battlefield, disintegrating the surrounding Zoreth ships in an instant. The remaining Zoreth forces, their command structure obliterated, fell into disarray, their ships scattering like leaves in the wind. The Excalibur lurched forward, the ship groaning with the immense strain of the attack. Systems flickered and sparked, but the crew held on. Their collective breath held as they watched the destruction unfold. The Zoreth fleet was shattered, its heart ripped out by the very ship they had doubted. "We did it," O'Connor whispered, his voice filled with disbelief. "We actually did it." But Captain Cole didn't smile. His eyes remained fixed on the fading remnants of the Zoreth fleet. They had won the battle. But the war, Cole knew, was far from over. Their victory had come at a great cost, and the true consequences of their actions were only beginning to unfold. Humanity had survived. For now.